go ahead.
All right, so I'm going to do it flow of blood through the chambers of the heart, and these two vessels right here, this is the superior vena cava, and this is the inferior vena cava, and they're bringing blood back to the heart. And the other blood vessel bringing blood back to the heart is this coronary sinus right here. So the coronary sinus, the inferior vena cava, and the superior vena cava are bringing blood back to this right atrium. So blood returns from all parts of the body into this right atrium. The right atrium contracts, and it sends blood to this right ventricle. And it goes through this valve right here called the right atrioventricular valve, also known as the tricuspid valve. And you can see that there's chordae tendineae attached to the valve, and then there's papillary muscles here pulling that chordae tendineae taut. And the papillary muscles keep the valve from inverting back up into the atrium when the ventricles contract. So now the blood's in the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, the blood is pumped into this pulmonary trunk right here and through this pulmonary semilunar valve. This is the pulmonary semilunar valve here. This is the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk bifurcates into this left pulmonary artery and this right pulmonary artery right here. So this is the right pulmonary artery, and that's the left pulmonary artery. That goes to the lungs. And then the blood returns to the heart via this right pulmonary pair of veins. These are the right pulmonary veins, and these are the left pulmonary veins. And that blood returns back to the heart through into this left atrium. When the left atrium contracts, it goes into the left ventricle through this bicuspid valve, also known as the left atrioventricular valve, also known as the mitral valve. And you can see the chordae tendineae on the mitral valve, and you can see the papillary muscles on the mitral valve. The the left ventricle contracts. This is the left ventricle. The left ventricle contracts and pumps blood into this aorta right here. And you have to look way up in here deep to see the aortic semilunar valves, way up in there. So you see those aortic semilunar valves. The blood is now in this aorta. The aorta goes up, which is called the ascending aorta. It arches, which is called the aortic arch. And then it descends behind the heart, and this is called the descending aorta. The very first two arteries coming off the aorta are these coronary arteries. This is the right coronary artery, and this is the left coronary artery. The left coronary artery bifurcates, and one of the first branches off of it is this anterior interventricular artery. Right next to this anterior interventricular artery is this great cardiac vein right here. That's called the great cardiac vein. On the back of the heart, you have this posterior interventricular artery right here. And right next to this posterior interventricular artery is this middle cardiac vein. And between the middle cardiac vein and the great cardiac vein is this small cardiac vein right here. That's the small cardiac vein. All right. That's it for that. Now, off the aortic arch, I have three main branches. I have this brachiocephalic trunk. I have this left common carotid artery, and I have this left subclavian artery. There is such thing as a right common carotid and a right subclavian, but they don't arise off this arch. They actually come off the brachiocephalic trunk, and that's next week's lab when we start talking about those peripheral arteries and veins. So brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid, left subclavian arteries. Any questions about that?
No.
I think that's everything. Oh, extra credit. You still running?
Yeah.
For extra credit, this is a fossa ovalis. It was once called the foramen ovale, and it was an opening between the right atrium and the right ventricle. The right atrium and the left atrium. It's how, when you're a fetus, you shunt blood from the pulmonary circuit. Because why would you want to pump blood to the lungs when you're a fetus and you're not breathing? So, right atria blood can go into the left atrium over here through a hole that used to be there called the foramen ovale. When you're born, that hole closes and it's called the fossa ovalis. But it's not perfect. Some blood still goes from the right atrium into the right ventricle, and then is pumped from the right ventricle into this pulmonary trunk. But there's another shunt, and this right here, this structure is called the ligamentum arteriosus. But it used to be called the ductus arteriosus when you were a fetus. So any blood that actually did get into the pulmonary trunk, that escaped the foramen ovale, can now enter the aorta through this ductus arteriosus. And after you're born, that ductus arteriosus closes and becomes the ligamentum arteriosus. And that's it.